There are still a lot of questions surrounding the events of yesterday and what happens next. WKYT's Washington correspondent Molly Martinez joins us from D.C. Molly, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. Tomorrow we've got the Republican National Convention. Of course, that's certainly going to impact security there. What kind of changes are we expecting?
Kelsey, the law enforcement behind RNC just held a press conference in which they said that there actually aren't going to be many changes. They were asked a lot about whether or not they were going to be expanding the perimeter. They said no, they will not be doing that. And in terms of beefing up security, it seems like it's going to be business as usual, and that yesterday's events didn't entirely affect the plan for the rest of the week. What will be affected, though, is sort of the tenor of the RNC. Donald Trump is a different candidate today than he was yesterday. And going into this RNC, I just spoke with one delegate, Niraj Antani of Ohio, who says that the party has never been more unified. They watched what happened yesterday, and they all had a pang of fear, and they are 100% behind their candidate, and they are ready and they are excited to elect Donald Trump as the next president. And so this is going to be a very formative week, not just because we are likely to know who his vice presidential pick will be, but this has really been a shift in the campaign. This is a cataclysmic difference than it was yesterday before this happened.
And on the other side of the aisle, President Biden planning to speak to the nation in just a few hours. What are we hearing from the White House?
Yeah, so he spoke earlier today and said that he is giving all of the resources to the FBI to launch a full investigation into how this happened, this huge lapse in security, how this gunman was able to scale a building with a rifle on his back undetected and fire off shots. So he is fully supportive of that. And also, you know, he's going to speak tonight, and we're expected for him to talk about unity. This is an act of political violence. It is terrifying, no matter your party, and as he said earlier, there's no place in American politics for this type of behavior, and they need to condone it in every possible degree. And so he is sort of stopping all of his political movements right now as sort of a show of sportsmanship. He's also pulling all of his TV ads. And so he's just sort of hitting pause on his campaign as the dust settles around this horrific incident.
It's only July. This has been a contentious race so far. Is there a way to turn down the temperature in the U.S. political arena? You know, this is one of those things that the next couple days are going to answer that question. Today we heard from Mike Johnson, who sort of blamed Biden for his rhetoric for this happening. Both sides of the aisle are pointing fingers right now, and sort of the overarching message is, you know, this is getting serious. The difference between an assassination attempt and an assassination in this case was a few centimeters. So this is a stark reality check that this is the political climate in which we live, and both sides are seeing this climate change, and they really need to have a reckoning and a look in the mirror of how they want to proceed and what type of language they want to use going forward. Large outdoor scale rallies have really been a staple of former President Donald Trump's political identity. Do you think this changes strategy moving forward? You know, that's a really good point. I've covered dozens of Trump rallies, and he's really a wholesale politician as well as a resale politician. And a lot of people had never heard of Butler, Pennsylvania before this incident. And this is really how he campaigns. He goes to rural America. He goes to these swing states. He goes to the backyards of voters that he needs to win this election. And so I think this will certainly have a pivot of security, and certainly this is a lesson that will not soon be forgotten. But I think Donald Trump is true to himself and in his campaigning and in the way he runs a campaign. And so I think we're still going to see him on the campaign trail, but certainly security will be a much different story. And is Washington reacting or even preparing at all for any potential retaliatory or copycat behaviors? Yeah, so this is really a safe time in Washington because security is so heightened and everyone is hyper aware, and they realize the magnitude of what potentially could have happened yesterday and what did happen yesterday. And like I said, this is a lesson that is going to be hard learned. The House Oversight Committee has already vowed to launch a full investigation. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson also on board with a full investigation to really get to the bottom of how this was able to happen and make sure we prevent anything like this from happening again. Molly, thank you so much for your time. We certainly appreciate you talking with us, and we'll be checking back in with you for updates. We want you to stay safe too. Thanks so much. And continuing our coverage tonight, people all across the country and right here in the Commonwealth are sharing their thoughts on the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Many are asking for thoughts and prayers for Trump and those injured and killed at that rally. WKYT Samantha Valentino talking with Kentuckians about the violent event in Pennsylvania.
But it will be just like where were you on 9/11 or when the Challenger exploded. Those types of events.
Kentucky Senate President Robert Stivers recounts watching the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump.
The first thing that goes through your mind is why? You know, why did this take place? Why have we gotten to this point?
Now he's sending thoughts and prayers to everyone affected and former President Trump. At the state and national level, Republicans and Democrats alike are publicly doing the same.
Probably one of the biggest things I've seen come out of this is both President Trump and President Biden have talked to each other and how they talk about how we need to unite. This may, out of a tragic event, be something that brings people together, that de-escalates the rhetoric.
Casey Crosby is the RNC National Committeewoman for Kentucky and the National RNC Treasurer.
It's okay to disagree on issues, but we're all humans at the end of the day, and there is no place for this type of violence in the political arena.
Crosby watched the assassination attempt from Milwaukee.
One of my close friends was at the event, and unfortunately, she pocket dialed me, so I heard in real time what was going on, as well as watching it unfold on TV. And I have to say it was quite horrifying to hear what she was experiencing there in person.
The Republican National Convention is still going on as planned, kicking off Monday.
We've worked on the event for just months on end. We're going to be putting on a safe, secure, and strong event. Our job doesn't change here.
In Frankfort, Samantha Valentino, WKYT.
And we did reach out to several Kentucky Democrats for comment on this story. They, including Governor Andy Beshear, were unavailable. Beshear taking to X yesterday to share his thoughts on the assassination attempt. He said he and First Lady Brittany Beshear are praying for the safety and health of the former president. He went on to say violence is never the answer. Never. Democratic candidate for Kentucky's 6th congressional district, Randy Cravens, who will face off against Representative Andy Barr in November, also releasing a statement on X saying, quote, political violence is never acceptable. It's not the answer. Prayers for all of those in the line of fire in Pennsylvania, end quote. And with yesterday's events, people are wondering what this might mean for the future presidential election and political landscape. WKYT's Carly Hogston talking with elections and voting behavior specialist Stephen Voss on what the road might look like as we approach the election.
The recent assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump highlights a reoccurring theme in American history. As incidents like yesterday have occurred in the past, they give us a sense of what may lie ahead in this year's election season.
Threats on a major political leader, like other threats to the country, typically result in a rally around the flag effect, a sort of temporary burst of patriotism, temporary burst in support for the politician.
But as the last presidential candidate assassination attempt happened decades ago, some things have changed.
You know, back the last time, for the most part, the message Americans got was filtered through authoritative journalists, TV news, their newspapers. These days, that's not true.
Just minutes after the event, politicians, celebrities, and people from all political ideologies took to social media to voice their condolences with many posts, including theories.
This willingness to believe conspiracy theories and the tendency to spread them is not isolated to one political ideology or the other. People on the left, people on the right start refining their messages about what the political impact of the event ought to be.
Rumors from both parties spread about how the attack might secure Trump's victory in November, but Voss says that the impact can be up in the air.
A political event like this assassination attempt these days doesn't have a whole lot of impact, but it can have some, and we're in a very close presidential race, so even a small impact could make a difference.
It could also change more than votes, but how the rest of the campaign might look.
Depending on what ultimately the authorities conclude about what led to the event, we might see a tightening up on the more loosey-goosey campaign events.
In Lexington, Carly Hogston, WKYT.